Question 1. Which approach would be most appropriate for an Indiana licensed real estate salesperson to recommend for estimating the value of a residential property when a full physical inspection is not possible due to time constraints, but access to comparable sales data and public records is readily available? Option A, commercial appraisal. Option B, desktop appraisal. Option C, residential appraisal. Option D, drive-by appraisal. The correct answer is B, desktop appraisal. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate licensee is being asked to provide an opinion of value for a property without conducting a full inspection, potentially leading to an inaccurate or misleading valuation. This requires careful judgment to ensure compliance with Indiana's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards, which mandate competence and diligence in all professional activities, including those related to property valuation. The most appropriate approach in this situation is a desktop appraisal. This method is correct because it allows a licensed appraiser to provide an opinion of value based on available data, such as comparable sales, market trends, and public records, without requiring a physical inspection of the property. Indiana law, while not dictating specific appraisal methodologies for all situations, expects licensees to act with reasonable care and skill. A desktop appraisal, when performed by a qualified individual, can meet this standard when a full inspection is not feasible or necessary for the intended use, provided the limitations are clearly communicated. It relies on the appraiser's expertise in analyzing data and understanding market dynamics. A residential appraisal, which involves a thorough physical inspection of the property and its surroundings, is not the best fit here because the request specifically implies a limitation on physical access or inspection time. To proceed with a full residential appraisal without the ability to conduct the required inspection would be a failure to perform the service competently and diligently, violating professional standards. A drive-by appraisal, while involving a limited physical observation, is still a form of inspection. If the scenario implies a complete lack of physical access or a need to rely solely on data, a drive-by appraisal might not be sufficient or appropriate, and attempting one without the necessary observation would be misleading. A commercial appraisal is designed for income-producing properties and involves complex valuation methods beyond the scope of a typical residential property, making it an inappropriate choice for a standard residential property valuation request. Undertaking a commercial appraisal for a residential property would demonstrate a lack of understanding of property types and valuation methodologies, leading to an inaccurate and unprofessional outcome. Professionals should approach such requests by first understanding the intended use of the valuation and the limitations imposed. They should then select the appraisal methodology that best suits the available information and the client's needs, while adhering to all relevant Indiana licensing regulations and ethical guidelines. If a full appraisal cannot be performed due to limitations, the licensee should clearly communicate these limitations to the client and suggest alternative, appropriate valuation methods, or decline the assignment if they cannot be performed competently. Question 2. Operational review demonstrates that an Indiana licensed mortgage loan originator has just received a complete mortgage application from a borrower. The borrower is eager to understand the potential costs and terms of the loan. Which of the following actions best represents adherence to Indiana's regulatory framework and federal guidelines governing the mortgage application process? Option A. Provide a loan estimate with intentionally underestimated closing costs to secure the borrower's interest. Option B. Delay providing any formal cost disclosures until the borrower has selected a specific loan product. Option C. Provide the borrower with a loan estimate detailing estimated loan terms, monthly payments, and closing costs within 3 business days of receiving the application. Option D. Verbally discuss estimated closing costs and interest rates with the borrower to provide immediate clarity. Correct answer is C. Provide the borrower with a loan estimate detailing estimated loan terms, monthly payments, and closing costs within 3 business days of receiving the application. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a mortgage loan originator, MLO, in Indiana to navigate the delicate balance between client enthusiasm and regulatory compliance during the initial stages of the mortgage application process. Missteps can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including potential violations of Indiana's mortgage lending laws and the SAFE Act. Careful judgment is required to ensure all disclosures are accurate, timely, and complete, without providing misleading information or making promises that cannot be substantiated. Best professional practice involves immediately providing the borrower with a loan estimate within 3 business days of receiving the borrower's application, as mandated by federal regulations that Indiana MLOs must adhere to. This document is crucial as it outlines the estimated loan terms, monthly payments, and closing costs. It serves as a standardized disclosure that allows borrowers to compare loan offers and understand the financial implications of their mortgage. Adhering to this timeline and content requirement is a cornerstone of ethical and legal mortgage origination in Indiana. An incorrect approach would be to verbally discuss estimated closing costs and interest rates without providing a formal loan estimate. While seemingly helpful, this practice bypasses a critical regulatory disclosure requirement. It can lead to borrower confusion and misrepresentation, as verbal estimates are not binding and can differ significantly from the final figures. This failure to provide the required disclosure in a timely manner violates federal and state regulations designed to protect consumers. Another incorrect approach is to delay providing the loan estimate until after the borrower has committed to a specific lender or loan product. This tactic can be seen as steering the borrower without providing them with the necessary comparative information upfront. The regulatory intent of the loan estimate is to facilitate informed decision-making from the outset, allowing borrowers to shop for the best terms. Withholding this document until after a commitment is made undermines this purpose and is a violation of consumer protection laws. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to provide a loan estimate that intentionally underestimates closing costs to make the loan appear more attractive. This is a clear violation of ethical conduct and federal disclosure laws. The loan estimate must be provided in good faith, reflecting a reasonable prediction of costs. Intentional underestimation is deceptive and can lead to significant financial harm to the borrower, resulting in severe penalties for the MLO and their sponsoring institution. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and consumer protection. This involves understanding the specific disclosure requirements at each stage of the mortgage application process, adhering to strict timelines, and ensuring all provided information is accurate and presented in a standardized, understandable format. When in doubt, consulting with compliance officers or legal counsel is essential to maintain ethical standards and avoid regulatory violations. Question 3. The assessment process reveals that a new Indiana real estate salesperson is struggling to articulate the full scope of what constitutes real estate to a potential buyer. Which of the following best reflects the comprehensive understanding required for professional practice in Indiana? Option A. Real estate is defined by Indiana law as land, any permanent improvements attached to it, and the bundle of rights associated with its ownership. Option B. Real estate is simply the market value of a property, and its definition is less important than achieving a quick sale for the client. Option C. Real estate primarily refers to the physical structures and land parcels that can be seen and touched, with legal ownership being a secondary consideration. Option D. Real estate is a universally understood concept, and a salesperson's role is to facilitate transactions based on common knowledge rather than specific legal definitions. The correct answer is A. Real estate is defined by Indiana law as land, any permanent improvements attached to it, and the bundle of rights associated with its ownership. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge for new Indiana real estate salespersons. Understanding the fundamental definition and importance of real estate beyond mere physical property. This scenario requires a salesperson to grasp that real estate encompasses not only land and its permanent attachments, but also the bundle of rights associated with ownership. A deep understanding is crucial for effectively advising clients, accurately representing properties, and adhering to Indiana's real estate laws and ethical standards. The best approach involves recognizing that real estate is a legal concept defined by Indiana law, including land, improvements, and the associated rights. This understanding is vital for fulfilling fiduciary duties to clients, accurately marketing properties by highlighting their unique attributes and legal standing, and ensuring compliance with the Indiana real estate license law. It forms the bedrock of professional practice, enabling salespersons to provide informed counsel and navigate complex transactions ethically and legally. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the physical aspects of a property, such as its size, number of rooms, or condition, while neglecting the legal rights of ownership. This oversight fails to acknowledge the comprehensive definition of real estate under Indiana law and can lead to misrepresentation or incomplete advice to clients, potentially violating ethical obligations and statutory requirements. Another incorrect approach is to view real estate merely as a commodity for quick sale, prioritizing transaction volume over client education and the nuanced understanding of property rights. This transactional mindset disregards the importance of informing clients about the full scope of their real estate interests, which is a core responsibility of a licensed Indiana real estate professional. Such a focus can lead to client dissatisfaction and potential legal issues arising from a lack of informed consent. Finally, an incorrect approach is to assume that the definition of real estate is universally understood and consistent across all contexts, without considering the specific legal framework of Indiana. This can lead to applying general knowledge that may not align with Indiana's statutory definitions and case law, thereby failing to provide accurate and jurisdictionally compliant advice. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the statutory definition of real estate within Indiana. This foundational knowledge should then be applied to every client interaction, ensuring that advice and representation are comprehensive, legally sound, and ethically aligned with the duties owed to clients and the public. Continuous learning and adherence to the Indiana real estate license law are paramount. Question 4. The assessment process reveals a property in a well-established suburban neighborhood of Indianapolis, Indiana, that is a standard single-family residence. The property has not been significantly renovated in the last 20 years, and its primary purpose is owner occupancy. Which valuation method would best reflect the current market value for a potential sale and align with Indiana's real estate licensing requirements? Option A. Income approach. By estimating potential rental income and applying a capitalization rate to determine market value. Option B. Comparative market analysis, by examining recent sales of similar homes in the immediate vicinity and adjusting for differences in features and condition. Option C. A combination of the income approach and the cost approach, as these methods provide a more comprehensive view of value. Option D. Cost approach, by calculating the replacement cost of the structure, subtracting depreciation, and adding the land value. The correct answer is B. Comparative market analysis, by examining recent sales of similar homes in the immediate vicinity and adjusting for differences in features and condition. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge for Indiana real estate licensees, determining the most appropriate valuation method for a unique property. This scenario is professionally challenging because the licensee must not only understand the theoretical underpinnings of each valuation method, but also apply them judiciously based on the specific characteristics of the property and the purpose of the valuation, adhering to Indiana's licensing laws and ethical standards. Misapplication can lead to inaccurate pricing, client dissatisfaction, and potential disciplinary action. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is the comparative market analysis. This method is best practice for residential properties in Indiana because it directly reflects current market conditions and buyer behavior. Indiana real estate law and ethical guidelines emphasize the importance of providing clients with accurate and relevant information. A comparative market analysis, CMA, achieves this by comparing the subject property to similar recently sold properties in the same or a very similar neighborhood, adjusting for differences. This aligns with the ethical duty to represent clients competently and honestly, ensuring the property is priced competitively and realistically. Using the income approach would be inappropriate and potentially misleading in this context. While valuable for income-producing properties, applying it to a single-family residence not primarily intended for rental income would require speculative assumptions about potential rental income and capitalization rates, which are not supported by the property's actual use or market. This deviates from the principle of providing a valuation based on observable market data and could be considered incompetent representation under Indiana's real estate regulations. The cost approach, while a valid valuation method, is generally less reliable for older residential properties. Its accuracy diminishes with the age of the property due to difficulties in estimating accrued depreciation accurately. Relying solely on the cost approach for a typical residential sale in Indiana would ignore the direct influence of market demand and comparable sales, failing to provide the most relevant valuation for a buyer or seller. This could be seen as a failure to exercise due diligence and provide a competent valuation as required by Indiana law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes the property type and the purpose of the valuation. For standard residential properties in Indiana, the comparative market analysis is the primary tool. If the property has unique characteristics, e.g., historical significance, significant land value, or is an income-producing property, then the licensee should consider the applicability of the cost approach or income approach, respectively, but always in conjunction with, or as a secondary consideration to, market-based data where possible. The licensee must be able to justify the chosen method, based on the property's attributes and market realities, always acting in the best interest of the client, and in compliance with Indiana's real estate statutes. Question 5. Market research demonstrates a growing interest among potential buyers in Indiana for properties suitable for home-based businesses. A real estate licensee is representing a buyer interested in a property located in a suburban area of Indianapolis. The buyer expresses a desire to operate a small, licensed catering business from the property's detached garage. What is the most prudent and legally compliant approach for the licensee to ensure the buyer's understanding of land use regulations? Option A. Inform the buyer that zoning is a complex legal matter and suggest they consult with an attorney without conducting any preliminary research on the property's specific zoning classification themselves. Option B. Proactively research the specific zoning ordinances and any applicable overlay districts or land use restrictions for the property's address in Marion County, Indiana, and advise the buyer on the permitted uses and any necessary permits or variances for operating a home-based catering business. Option C. Advise the buyer that zoning regulations are generally similar across suburban areas of Indianapolis and that they should proceed with their business plans, as most residential zones allow for minor home-based operations. Option D. Rely on the seller's statement that the property has always been in a residential zone and assume that a small home-based business would be permissible without further investigation. The correct answer is B. Proactively research the specific zoning ordinances and any applicable overlay districts or land use restrictions for the property's address in Marion County, Indiana, and advise the buyer on the permitted uses and any necessary permits or variances for operating a home-based catering business. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate the complexities of local zoning ordinances and land use regulations in Indiana, which can vary significantly from one municipality to another. A licensee's failure to accurately understand and communicate these regulations can lead to significant legal and financial consequences for their clients, as well as professional disciplinary action. Careful judgment is required to ensure that advice provided is accurate, up-to-date, and directly applicable to the specific property and its intended use. The best professional approach involves proactively and thoroughly researching the specific zoning ordinances and land use regulations applicable to the property in question. This includes identifying the property's current zoning classification, understanding any restrictions or requirements associated with that classification, e.g., setback requirements, lot coverage, permitted uses, and investigating any known or potential future land use plans or overlays that might affect the property's development or use. This approach is correct because Indiana law, through its real estate licensing statutes and regulations, mandates that licensees act with honesty, integrity, and competence. Providing accurate information about zoning and land use is a fundamental aspect of competent representation and fulfills the licensee's duty to inform their client of material facts that could affect the property's value or desirability. Ethical guidelines also require licensees to avoid misrepresentation and to exercise reasonable care. An incorrect approach involves relying solely on the seller's verbal assurances regarding zoning and permitted uses without independent verification. This is professionally unacceptable because verbal assurances are not legally binding and can be inaccurate or incomplete. Licensee has a duty to verify material facts, and zoning is a material fact. Relying on such assurances constitutes a failure to exercise reasonable care and could lead to misrepresentation if the information provided to the buyer is incorrect. Another incorrect approach is to assume that zoning regulations in one Indiana county or city will be the same as in another. This is professionally unacceptable because zoning ordinances are enacted at the local level, city or county, and are highly specific to each jurisdiction. Making such assumptions demonstrates a lack of due diligence and can result in providing incorrect information to clients, leading to significant problems. A further incorrect approach is to advise the buyer that they can probably use the property for their intended purpose without confirming the specific zoning allowances. This is professionally unacceptable because it introduces ambiguity and uncertainty into a critical aspect of the transaction. The licensee's role is to provide clear, factual information, not to offer speculative advice on zoning compliance. This approach fails to meet the standard of competence and honesty required by Indiana real estate law and ethics. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes due diligence and accurate information gathering. This involves 1. Identifying the specific property and its location. 2. Determining the relevant local governmental authority responsible for zoning and land use. 3. Accessing and reviewing the official zoning ordinances and land use plans for that jurisdiction. 4. Consulting with local planning or zoning departments if clarification is needed. 5. Clearly communicating verified information to the client, advising them to seek independent legal counsel for complex interpretations or applications. Question 6. Market research demonstrates that a 100-acre parcel in rural Indiana features a substantial farmhouse, several barns, and is actively used for crop cultivation. The owner, a retired farmer, is selling the property primarily because of its ongoing agricultural productivity. Which of the following classifications best represents this property according to Indiana real estate principles? Option A. Agricultural property. Option B. Commercial property. Option C. Industrial property. Option D. Residential property. The correct answer is A. Agricultural property. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the licensee to accurately identify the primary purpose and intended use of property to ensure compliance with Indiana real estate law and ethical practice. Misclassifying a property can lead to significant legal and financial repercussions for both the client and the licensee, including potential disciplinary action by the Indiana Real Estate Commission. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between the dominant use and secondary characteristics of a property. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding of the property's primary intended use as dictated by its current condition, zoning, and the client's stated objectives. This means carefully evaluating factors such as the presence of farm structures, the acreage, the type of soil, and any existing agricultural operations. If the property is primarily used for farming, with ancillary residential structures, it should be classified as agricultural. This aligns with Indiana's regulatory framework, which recognizes agricultural properties as a distinct category, often subject to specific disclosure requirements and valuation methods. Adhering to this classification ensures that marketing efforts are appropriate, potential buyers are properly informed, and all legal obligations are met. An incorrect approach would be to classify the property solely based on the presence of a residential dwelling, ignoring the significant agricultural components. This fails to acknowledge the dominant use and could mislead potential buyers who are specifically seeking agricultural land. It also bypasses potential disclosures and considerations unique to agricultural transactions, potentially violating Indiana's disclosure laws and ethical duties of full and fair representation. Another incorrect approach is to classify the property as commercial simply because it is being sold by a business entity or has some structures that could theoretically be repurposed. Commercial real estate typically involves properties intended for business operations, retail, or services, which is not the primary function of land predominantly used for farming. This misclassification would lead to inappropriate marketing and could violate the principle of accurately representing the property's nature. Finally, classifying the property as industrial due to the presence of outbuildings or its potential for future development without regard to its current primary agricultural use is also incorrect. Industrial properties are designated for manufacturing, processing, or warehousing. Misrepresenting an agricultural property as industrial would be a significant ethical breach and a violation of Indiana real estate regulations, as it would mislead buyers about the property's current zoning, intended use, and potential limitations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the client's primary objective for the property, analyzing the property's current physical characteristics and zoning, and then aligning these with the established categories of real estate as defined by Indiana law and common practice. When in doubt, consulting with experienced agricultural real estate specialists, or seeking clarification from regulatory bodies is advisable. Question 7. Market research demonstrates that a buyer, after signing a fully executed purchase agreement for a property in Indianapolis, Indiana, expresses significant regret and a desire to withdraw from the transaction. The purchase agreement contains all essential elements of a contract, including a clear offer, acceptance, adequate consideration, and a legal purpose. The buyer's agent, aware of the buyer's change of heart, is considering how to proceed. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the buyer's agent in Indiana? Option A. Advise the buyer that the purchase agreement is a legally binding contract. Explain the potential consequences of breach under Indiana law, and strongly recommend they consult with an independent real estate attorney to understand their options. Option B. Persuade the buyer to proceed with the purchase by emphasizing the financial penalties they might incur if they back out, without suggesting they seek legal advice. Option C. Immediately agree to terminate the contract and return the earnest money to the buyer, as the buyer's emotional state indicates they are no longer committed to the purchase. Option D. Inform the buyer that as their agent, you will attempt to negotiate a release from the contract with the seller on their behalf, without involving legal counsel. The correct answer is A. Advise the buyer that the purchase agreement is a legally binding contract. Explain the potential consequences of breach under Indiana law, and strongly recommend they consult with an independent real estate attorney to understand their options. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in real estate transactions where a buyer's initial enthusiasm wanes, leading to a potential breach of contract. The professional challenge lies in navigating the buyer's change of heart, while upholding the contractual obligations and ethical duties owed to both parties, adhering strictly to Indiana real estate law. The broker must balance the desire to maintain a client relationship with the legal and ethical imperative to enforce a valid contract. The best approach involves clearly communicating the enforceability of the purchase agreement to the buyer, emphasizing the legal consequences of withdrawal, and advising them to seek independent legal counsel. This aligns with Indiana law, which recognizes purchase agreements as legally binding contracts once all essential elements are present: offer, acceptance, consideration, and a legal purpose. Indiana Code Section 32-21-1-1 et sec. outlines the requirements for valid contracts, and a properly executed purchase agreement meets these criteria. By advising legal counsel, the agent facilitates the buyer's understanding of their rights and obligations, while also protecting themselves and their brokerage from potential liability. This also upholds the fiduciary duty to act with honesty and integrity. An approach that involves immediately releasing the buyer from the contract without exploring the enforceability of the agreement or advising legal counsel is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge the binding nature of the purchase agreement under Indiana law and could be seen as a breach of the agent's duty to their seller, who has a right to expect the contract to be honored or for the buyer to face consequences for breach. Another unacceptable approach is to pressure the buyer to proceed with the purchase despite their reluctance, without fully explaining the legal ramifications or suggesting they seek legal advice. This could be construed as coercion and may violate ethical standards and potentially Indiana's deceptive practices regulations, as it does not prioritize the buyer's informed decision-making. Finally, an approach that involves the agent attempting to unilaterally negotiate a release or penalty without consulting with the seller or understanding the full legal standing of the contract is also professionally unsound. This oversteps the agent's authority and could lead to disputes and legal complications, as the contract is between the buyer and seller, not the agent. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with identifying the contractual status of the agreement. This involves reviewing the purchase agreement for all essential elements. If a valid contract exists, the next step is to inform the client of its legal standing and potential consequences of breach. Crucially, advising the client to seek independent legal counsel is paramount to ensure they make informed decisions and to mitigate the agent's liability. Throughout this process, maintaining clear, honest, and documented communication with all parties is essential. Question 8. Compliance review shows that an Indiana real estate salesperson has presented a buyer with a preliminary loan estimate from a mortgage lender. The salesperson believes the interest rate quoted is slightly higher than market average and has told the buyer, "Don't worry, we can probably get this rate lowered before closing. The salesperson has not independently verified the lender's stated closing costs with the lender or any third-party providers. Which of the following approaches best reflects professional and regulatory compliance in Indiana? Option A. The salesperson should encourage the buyer to seek financing from a different lender without verifying the current loan estimate's details, as the quoted rate may be unfavorable. Option B. The salesperson should immediately confirm the accuracy of all figures on the loan estimate with the lender and clearly explain all estimated closing costs to the buyer, advising them that the interest rate is subject to the lender's final approval and underwriting. Option C. The salesperson should proceed with the purchase agreement based on the preliminary loan estimate, assuming the lender will automatically adjust the interest rate and closing costs to the buyer's advantage. Option D. The salesperson should assure the buyer that they will negotiate a lower interest rate with the lender and focus on getting the closing costs reduced, as these are typically negotiable. Correct answer is B. The salesperson should immediately confirm the accuracy of all figures on the loan estimate with the lender and clearly explain all estimated closing costs to the buyer, advising them that the interest rate is subject to the lender's final approval and underwriting. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in real estate financing, where a licensee must navigate the complexities of loan origination and disclosure requirements under Indiana law. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that the financing terms presented to the buyer are accurate, transparent, and compliant with Indiana's real estate license law and related consumer protection statutes, particularly concerning the disclosure of all associated costs and the licensee's role. Misrepresenting or omitting crucial financing details can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including license suspension or revocation, and financial harm to the buyer. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves diligently verifying the accuracy of all financing terms provided by the lender and ensuring that the buyer fully understands all associated costs and fees before signing any purchase agreement. This includes confirming that the stated interest rate, loan term, and estimated closing costs are precisely as presented by the lender and are clearly communicated to the buyer. Indiana law, specifically through its real estate license law, IC 25-34. 1. And related administrative rules, mandates that licensees act with honesty, integrity, and competence, and that they provide accurate information to all parties. This approach prioritizes full disclosure and client understanding, aligning with the fiduciary duty owed to the buyer and the regulatory expectation of transparency in real estate transactions. Incorrect approaches analysis. Presenting the lender's preliminary loan estimate without independent verification of its accuracy, or without ensuring the buyer comprehends all fees, is a failure to exercise due diligence and provide accurate information. This could violate Indiana's real estate license law by misrepresenting material facts, suggesting to the buyer that the interest rate is negotiable when the lender has already provided a firm rate, or implying that certain closing costs can be waived without confirmation from the lender, constitutes misrepresentation and a breach of ethical conduct. Furthermore, failing to disclose any potential referral fees or compensation the licensee might receive related to the financing arrangement, if applicable, could violate disclosure requirements under Indiana law and potentially conflict with the licensee's duty of loyalty to the buyer. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to financing disclosures. This involves 1. Obtaining all relevant financing documentation from the lender. 2. Thoroughly reviewing these documents for accuracy and completeness. 3. Clearly explaining all terms, fees, and potential costs to the buyer in plain language, ensuring comprehension. And 4. Documenting all disclosures and communications. When in doubt about any financing aspect, licensees should consult with the lender directly or advise the buyer to seek independent legal or financial counsel. This proactive and transparent method safeguards both the client and the licensee's professional standing. Question 9. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a prospective buyer in Indiana is seeking financing for a property purchase. The buyer has expressed some confusion about the different types of mortgages available and is looking for guidance. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the Indiana Real Estate Commission's guidelines for salesperson conduct regarding financing advice? Option A. Explain the general categories of mortgage loans, e.g., conventional, FHA, VA, and their basic characteristics, then advise the buyer to consult with a licensed mortgage loan originator or lender for personalized advice and to explore specific product options. Option B. Provide the buyer with a list of mortgage lenders the salesperson has worked with previously and encourage them to choose one without further explanation of the lender's services. Option C. Recommend a specific mortgage product that the salesperson believes is most suitable for the buyer, based on their stated income and debt, without suggesting they speak to a loan officer. Option D. Assure the buyer that a particular type of loan will likely be approved due to current market conditions, and that the salesperson can facilitate the application process directly. The correct answer is A. Explain the general categories of mortgage loans, e.g., conventional, FHA, VA, and their basic characteristics, then advise the buyer to consult with a licensed mortgage loan originator or lender for personalized advice and to explore specific product options. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a salesperson to navigate the complexities of financing options for a client while adhering to Indiana's specific real estate licensing laws and ethical obligations. The salesperson must balance the client's immediate needs with the long-term implications of the financing, ensuring transparency and avoiding misrepresentation, which are critical in maintaining client trust and regulatory compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly understanding the client's financial situation and goals, then presenting a range of suitable financing options available in Indiana, and strongly recommending consultation with qualified mortgage professionals. This approach is correct because Indiana law, specifically under the Indiana Professional Licensing Agency's Real Estate Commission rules, mandates that licensees act with honesty, integrity, and competence. Providing a broad overview of financing types and directing the client to licensed professionals for specific advice ensures the salesperson is operating within their scope of practice and not providing unlicensed financial advice. It upholds the duty of care owed to the client by facilitating informed decision-making through expert channels. Incorrect approach is analysis. Presenting only one specific loan product without exploring alternatives or recommending professional consultation is an ethical failure. It suggests a potential bias or lack of comprehensive knowledge, which violates the duty of competence and honesty. Furthermore, it could lead to the client not securing the most advantageous loan for their situation. Recommending a specific mortgage broker or lender without disclosing any potential referral fees or affiliations is a violation of disclosure requirements and could be construed as a conflict of interest, undermining client trust and potentially violating Indiana's advertising and disclosure regulations for licensees. Suggesting that a particular financing option is guaranteed to be approved, regardless of the client's creditworthiness or the lender's underwriting process, constitutes misrepresentation. This is a direct violation of the principle of honesty and integrity and could lead to significant financial harm for the client, exposing the salesperson to disciplinary action under Indiana real estate law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize client well-being and operate within the bounds of their licensing. This involves a commitment to continuous education regarding market trends and financing options, coupled with a clear understanding of when to refer clients to other licensed professionals. A systematic approach would involve 1. Active listening to understand the client's financial capacity and objectives. 2. Providing general information about common financing avenues relevant to the Indiana market. 3. Emphasizing the importance of professional financial advice from mortgage brokers, lenders, or financial advisors. 4. Disclosing any potential referral relationships transparently. 5. Avoiding any statements that guarantee loan approval or misrepresent the terms of financing. Question 10. Quality control measures reveal that an Indiana real estate salesperson is advising a client interested in investing in a real estate investment trust rate. The client specifically asks about the potential income the rate might generate. The salesperson has access to the rate current share price and its projected annual dividends per share. Which of the following methods for calculating and presenting potential income is the most appropriate and compliant with Indiana's real estate regulations? Option A. Calculate the projected dividend yield by dividing the projected annual dividends per share by the current share price and present this percentage to the client. Option B. Inform the client about the rate stock price performance over the last 5 years, assuming similar growth will continue. Option C. Emphasize the potential for the REIT share price to increase significantly in the coming year without mentioning dividend payouts. Option D. Provide a general estimate of potential returns, stating that it could be a good earner, without specific calculations. The correct answer is A. Calculate the projected dividend yield by dividing the projected annual dividends per share by the current share price and present this percentage to the client. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate professionals in Indiana when advising clients on investment opportunities. The complexity arises from the need to accurately calculate and explain the potential returns of a real estate investment trust REIT, while adhering to Indiana's specific disclosure requirements and ethical obligations to provide clear, unbiased information. Misrepresenting potential returns or failing to disclose relevant factors can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a thorough calculation of the REIT projected dividend yield based on its current share price and projected annual dividends per share. This calculation directly addresses the client's core question about income generation from the investment. The projected dividend yield is a standard metric for REIT and provides a quantifiable measure of potential return. This approach is correct because it is fact-based, directly answers the client's query with a relevant financial metric, and aligns with the Indiana Real Estate License law's emphasis on honesty and fair dealing in all transactions. It avoids speculation and focuses on readily available financial data. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves simply stating the REIT historical performance without projecting future income. While historical performance can be informative, it does not guarantee future results and can be misleading if presented as a direct predictor of future dividend payments. This fails to meet the client's specific need for information about potential income generation and could be construed as a misrepresentation if future dividends differ significantly. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the potential for capital appreciation. While capital appreciation is a component of total return, the client specifically inquired about income. Omitting the dividend yield calculation and focusing only on price increases ignores a crucial aspect of REIT investments and fails to provide a complete picture of potential returns, potentially misleading the client about the nature of the income stream. A further incorrect approach is to provide a vague estimate of returns without any supporting calculations or clear methodology. This lacks professionalism and transparency. It opens the door to accusations of speculation or bias and does not provide the client with the concrete information needed to make an informed investment decision, violating the duty of care and competence expected of a licensed Indiana real estate professional. Professional reasoning. When advising clients on investment properties, including REIT, Indiana real estate professionals must prioritize accuracy, transparency, and client-centric information. The decision-making process should involve 1. Clearly understanding the client's investment goals and questions. 2. Utilizing relevant financial metrics and calculations that directly address those goals. 3. Ensuring all information provided is factually based and avoids speculation. 4. Disclosing all material information, both positive and negative, that could impact the client's decision. 5. Adhering strictly to Indiana real estate license law regarding honesty, fair dealing, and avoiding misrepresentation. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows that an Indiana real estate investor client needs to close on a property quickly and has limited traditional financing options. The investor is considering a hard money loan or seller financing. What is the most responsible course of action for the Indiana licensed real estate salesperson? Option A. Recommend a hard money lender based on a casual recommendation from another agent, without verifying the lender's Indiana licensing or the specific loan terms. Option B. Advise the client to proceed with the hard money loan that offers the fastest closing, as speed is the primary concern, without extensive due diligence on the lender's terms. Option C. Facilitate a seller financing agreement by drafting a basic agreement based on common practices, assuming the seller and buyer will work out any issues later. Option D. Thoroughly vet the hard money lender for licensing and reputation in Indiana, and ensure all terms of any seller financing agreement are transparent, legally sound, and compliant with Indiana regulations, advising the client to seek independent legal counsel. The correct answer is D. Thoroughly vet the hard money lender for licensing and reputation in Indiana, and ensure all terms of any seller financing agreement are transparent, legally sound, and compliant with Indiana regulations, advising the client to seek independent legal counsel. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that understanding the nuances of financing options is critical for Indiana real estate professionals. This scenario presents a challenge because a salesperson must balance their client's immediate need for funding with the long-term implications and regulatory compliance associated with different loan types. The salesperson's duty is to advise their client on the most suitable and compliant financing, not just the quickest. The best approach involves thoroughly vetting the hard money lender and ensuring all terms of the seller financing agreement are transparent and legally sound, aligning with Indiana's real estate and lending regulations. This includes verifying the lender's licensing status in Indiana, understanding the loan-to-value ratios, interest rates, fees, and repayment terms, and ensuring the seller financing agreement clearly outlines all responsibilities, default clauses, and remedies in accordance with Indiana contract law. This proactive due diligence protects the client from predatory lending practices and ensures compliance with disclosure requirements. An incorrect approach involves solely focusing on the speed of closing offered by a hard money loan without investigating the lender's reputation or the loan's terms. This could lead to a client accepting a loan with exorbitant fees or unfavorable terms that they may not fully comprehend, potentially violating Indiana's consumer protection laws related to lending and disclosure. Another incorrect approach is to facilitate seller financing without ensuring the seller has consulted with legal counsel to draft a compliant agreement. This could result in an unenforceable contract or disputes that are difficult to resolve under Indiana law, failing the salesperson's duty of care. Finally, recommending a financing option based solely on personal familiarity or a referral without independent verification of its suitability and compliance with Indiana regulations is also professionally unsound and potentially unethical. Professionals should approach financing discussions by first understanding the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment goals. They should then research and present a range of viable financing options, clearly explaining the pros and cons of each, with a particular emphasis on how each option complies with Indiana's specific real estate and lending laws. This includes advising clients to seek independent legal and financial advice before committing to any financing agreement. Question 12. Strategic planning requires a real estate broker in Indiana to consider various scenarios. If a broker is exclusively representing a seller in a transaction and a buyer, who is not currently represented by an agent, expresses strong interest in purchasing the property, what is the most appropriate course of action for the broker to ensure compliance with Indiana's real estate license law and ethical practice? Option A. Advise the buyer to immediately seek independent representation and withdraw from any further involvement in the transaction to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Option B. Continue to exclusively represent the seller and steer the buyer towards another agent within the brokerage to handle the buyer's representation. Option C. Proceed to represent the buyer in the transaction without informing the seller about the new agency relationship, assuming the buyer will eventually find their own representation. Option D. Immediately inform the seller of the buyer's interest and the buyer's lack of representation, and seek the seller's written consent to act as a disclosed dual agent for both parties in the transaction. The correct answer is D. Immediately inform the seller of the buyer's interest and the buyer's lack of representation, and seek the seller's written consent to act as a disclosed dual agent for both parties in the transaction. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate broker to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with Indiana's strict agency disclosure laws. The broker must balance the desire to secure a sale with the ethical and legal obligation to represent their clients' best interests transparently. Careful judgment is required to avoid misrepresentation or undisclosed dual agency, which could lead to legal repercussions and damage to the brokerage's reputation. The best professional approach involves immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the seller and obtaining their informed consent to proceed with representing the buyer. This approach aligns with Indiana's real estate license law, specifically concerning agency relationships and disclosure requirements. Indiana Code 25-34, 1-10-14 mandates that a broker must disclose to all parties in a real estate transaction any agency relationship the broker has with any other party in the transaction. By proactively informing the seller and securing their written agreement, the broker upholds their fiduciary duty to the seller while also acknowledging the new agency relationship with the buyer. This transparency ensures that all parties are aware of the broker's role and potential loyalties, preventing any perception of impropriety or undisclosed dual agency. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with representing the buyer without informing the seller about the new agency relationship. This failure to disclose violates Indiana Code 25-34, 1-10-14, which requires full disclosure of agency relationships. Such an omission could be construed as a breach of fiduciary duty to the seller and potentially lead to claims of misrepresentation or undisclosed dual agency. Another incorrect approach would be to advise the seller that they should find another agent to represent them without first attempting to obtain informed consent for dual agency. While this avoids a direct conflict, it may not be the most beneficial outcome for the seller if they are comfortable with the broker's continued involvement under a disclosed dual agency arrangement. More importantly, it fails to explore a legally permissible option for the broker and the parties involved. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to continue representing only the seller and to steer the buyer towards another agent without fully exploring the possibility of disclosed dual agency. This misses an opportunity to facilitate the transaction for both parties, provided all legal and ethical requirements for dual agency are met. The professional reasoning process should involve identifying potential conflicts of interest early, understanding the specific disclosure requirements under Indiana law, and prioritizing transparent communication with all parties involved to obtain informed consent before proceeding with any transaction that could create a conflict. Question 13. Cost-benefit analysis shows that understanding mortgage types is crucial for Indiana homebuyers. A licensee is working with a first-time homebuyer who is exploring financing options. Which of the following actions best represents the licensee's professional responsibility in discussing mortgage types? Option A. Clearly explain the fundamental differences between fixed-rate, adjustable rate, and interest-only mortgages, including their general implications for payment stability and principal repayment, to enable informed discussion with a lender. Option B. Recommend an interest-only mortgage, emphasizing that it allows the buyer to build equity faster by focusing payments on the principal from the outset. Option C. Advise the buyer that an adjustable-rate mortgage is likely the best option for them because it typically offers lower initial payments, which is beneficial for first-time buyers. Option D. Suggests that the buyer should choose the mortgage type with the lowest advertised interest rate, as this will always result in the most savings over the life of the loan. The correct answer is A. Clearly explain the fundamental differences between fixed-rate, adjustable rate, and interest-only mortgages, including their general implications for payment stability and principal repayment, to enable informed discussion with a lender. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate licensee must guide a client through complex mortgage options without providing unlicensed financial advice. The core difficulty lies in educating the client about the fundamental differences and implications of various mortgage types, enabling them to make an informed decision with their chosen lender, while strictly adhering to Indiana's real estate licensing laws and ethical obligations. Misrepresenting or overstepping professional boundaries could lead to disciplinary action and harm to the client. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly and accurately explaining the core characteristics and typical implications of fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages. This approach educates the client on the fundamental differences, such as payment stability versus potential fluctuation, and the long-term amortization versus interest-only periods. This aligns with Indiana law requiring licensees to act with honesty and integrity and to avoid misrepresentation. By providing factual information about the mortgage types, the licensee empowers the client to have a more informed discussion with their mortgage lender without engaging in financial advisory services. This respects the boundaries of the real estate license. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves recommending a specific mortgage type based on the licensee's personal opinion of what would be best for the client's financial situation. This constitutes providing unlicensed financial advice, which is a violation of Indiana real estate law and potentially securities law. Licensees are not qualified or authorized to assess a client's overall financial health or to make recommendations about financial products. Another incorrect approach is to downplay the risks associated with adjustable-rate mortgages or interest-only loans, focusing solely on their initial lower payments. This misrepresentation can mislead the client about the potential for future payment increases or the lack of principal reduction in interest-only periods, violating the duty of honesty and fair dealing owed to clients under Indiana regulations. A further incorrect approach is to suggest that the client should choose a mortgage type solely based on the lowest advertised interest rate, without explaining the underlying structure of the loan. This superficial guidance fails to educate the client on the critical differences in payment stability, long-term costs, and risk profiles inherent in each mortgage type, thereby not fulfilling the licensee's obligation to facilitate an informed decision-making process. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always operate within the scope of their license. When discussing mortgage options, the focus should be on providing factual, educational information about the general characteristics of each type. This empowers the client to engage in informed discussions with qualified financial professionals, such as mortgage lenders or financial advisors. The licensee's role is to facilitate the real estate transaction, not to provide financial planning or investment advice. A clear understanding of one's professional boundaries, coupled with a commitment to honest and transparent communication, is paramount. Question 14. The efficiency study reveals that a real estate licensee in Indiana is working with a first-time homebuyer who is interested in utilizing a government-backed loan. The licensee has a general understanding that FHA, VA, and USDA loans can offer benefits like lower down payments, but they are unsure of the specific eligibility nuances and how to best advise the client without overstepping their professional boundaries. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensee? Option A. Advise the buyer that VA loans are generally the most advantageous for eligible veterans and proceed to help them find properties that fit VA loan parameters, assuming they will qualify. Option B. Offer to pre-qualify the buyer for a government-backed loan themselves, using their knowledge of the programs to expedite the home search process. Option C. Provide the buyer with a general overview of FHA, VA, and USDA loans, highlighting their common benefits, and then strongly recommend they consult with multiple qualified mortgage lenders to determine their specific eligibility and the best loan product for their situation. Option D. Explain that FHA loans are the easiest to qualify for and focus the property search on homes that meet FHA minimum property standards, assuring the buyer that this is the best starting point. The correct answer is C. Provide the buyer with a general overview of FHA, VA, and USDA loans, highlighting their common benefits, and then strongly recommend they consult with multiple qualified mortgage lenders to determine their specific eligibility and the best loan product for their situation. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate the specific eligibility requirements and benefits of government-backed loan programs while ensuring the client's best interests are met without misrepresentation. The licensee must understand the nuances of FHA, VA, and USDA loans beyond their basic purpose. The best approach involves thoroughly educating the client on the distinct characteristics of each loan type, including their respective eligibility criteria, down payment requirements, and potential benefits, and then guiding them to consult with a qualified mortgage lender. This is correct because Indiana law and professional licensing regulations mandate that licensees act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interests of their clients. Providing accurate, comprehensive information about loan options and directing the client to a specialist for definitive qualification is a core ethical and legal obligation. It avoids the licensee overstepping their expertise and ensures the client receives professional financial advice from a licensed mortgage professional. An approach that focuses solely on the perceived advantages of one loan type without a full understanding of the client's specific situation or the program's limitations is incorrect. This could lead to misinformed decisions and potential harm to the client if they are not truly eligible or if the loan is not the most suitable option for their financial circumstances. Another incorrect approach is to make definitive statements about loan approval or guarantee eligibility without proper qualification. Real estate licensees are not mortgage underwriters or loan officers. Making such guarantees is a misrepresentation of their capabilities and the nature of government-backed loans, which are subject to lender underwriting and specific program guidelines. This violates the principle of providing truthful and accurate information. Finally, an approach that prioritizes closing a transaction over ensuring the client's suitability for a particular loan program is ethically unsound and potentially illegal. The licensee's duty is to the client's welfare, not solely to the transaction's completion. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education, accurate information dissemination, and collaboration with other licensed professionals. This involves understanding the scope of their own expertise, recognizing when to refer clients to specialists, and always acting with transparency and in the client's best interest, adhering strictly to Indiana's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. Question 15. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a client purchasing a property in Indianapolis, Indiana, has expressed a strong desire for a detailed breakdown of all financial transactions related to their purchase, beyond just the final closing statement. The licensee has managed earnest money deposits, coordinated with the closing company, and overseen the disbursement of funds. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Indiana licensed real estate salesperson to take in managing this client's request for financial information? Option A. Share the brokerage's internal financial management software reports directly with the client to allow them to review all raw financial data. Option B. Provide the client with a simple, unorganized list of all expenses incurred during the transaction without any supporting documentation or detailed explanations. Option C. Only provide the client with the final settlement statement from the closing company, as this is the only legally required financial document. Option D. Compile a comprehensive summary of all financial aspects of the transaction handled by the brokerage, including earnest money deposits, disbursements, and any other relevant financial details, presented in a clear and organized manner, and provide a copy to the client. The correct answer is D. Compile a comprehensive summary of all financial aspects of the transaction handled by the brokerage, including earnest money deposits, disbursements, and any other relevant financial details, presented in a clear and organized manner, and provide a copy to the client. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee in Indiana to balance the client's immediate desire for financial information with the licensee's legal and ethical obligations regarding record-keeping and reporting. The licensee must act in the client's best interest while adhering strictly to Indiana's real estate regulations. The core of the challenge lies in understanding what information can be shared, how it should be presented, and the limitations imposed by professional conduct rules. The best approach involves the licensee compiling a comprehensive, organized, and accurate summary of all financial aspects of the transaction that are directly related to the property and the sale process, as permitted by Indiana law and professional standards. This summary should include details on earnest money deposits, closing costs, and any other funds handled by the licensee or their brokerage, presented in a clear and understandable format. This approach is correct because it directly fulfills the client's need for financial transparency while adhering to Indiana's strict record-keeping requirements under the Indiana Real Estate License Law, IC 25-34. 1. And the associated administrative rules. These regulations mandate that licensees maintain accurate and complete records of all transactions and provide clients with copies of relevant documents. By providing a detailed, organized summary, the licensee demonstrates diligence, honesty, and accountability, which are foundational ethical principles for real estate professionals. An incorrect approach would be to provide the client with a simple, unorganized list of expenses without any supporting documentation or context. This fails to meet the standard of providing a clear and accurate accounting of funds, potentially leading to misunderstandings or disputes. It also neglects the requirement for organized record-keeping, which is crucial for auditability and client protection. Another incorrect approach would be to only provide the client with the final settlement statement without any interim financial updates or explanations. While the settlement statement is a critical document, withholding information about the handling of funds throughout the transaction, such as earnest money deposits, can create a perception of opacity and may not fully satisfy the client's need for ongoing financial clarity. This approach risks violating the duty of full disclosure and can erode client trust. A further incorrect approach would be to share proprietary financial management software reports directly with the client without proper summarization or anonymization. This not only risks exposing sensitive brokerage information, but also presents financial data in a format that may be confusing or overwhelming for the client, failing to meet the obligation to communicate information clearly and effectively. It also potentially violates privacy and data security principles. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the client's specific information needs, and then cross-referencing those needs with their legal and ethical obligations under Indiana law. This involves a process of information gathering, organization, and clear communication, ensuring that all shared information is accurate, relevant, and presented in a manner that is easily understood by the client, while strictly adhering to record-keeping and reporting mandates. Question 16. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a property listed for sale in Indianapolis, Indiana, has an unreleased mortgage on record, even though the seller claims the loan was fully paid off 5 years ago. As the listing agent, what is the most prudent course of action to protect your client's property rights and ensure compliance with Indiana real estate law? Option A. Inform the buyer that the mortgage is unreleased and suggest they consult their own attorney, without offering further assistance in resolving the title issue. Option B. Advise the buyer to proceed with the purchase and obtain title insurance, as this will cover any issues related to the unreleased mortgage. Option C. Advise the seller to obtain proof of satisfaction or release from the lender and work with a title company to clear the title before closing, while keeping the buyer informed of the process and potential delays. Option D. Inform the buyer that the mortgage is unreleased, but that it is likely a clerical error, and proceed with the sale, assuming the seller will handle it post-closing. The correct answer is C. Advise the seller to obtain proof of satisfaction or release from the lender and work with a title company to clear the title before closing, while keeping the buyer informed of the process and potential delays. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate a complex situation involving potential encumbrances on a property title, which directly impacts the buyer's property rights and ownership. A licensee must exercise due diligence and provide accurate information to their client to prevent future legal disputes and ensure a smooth transaction. The Indiana Real Estate License Law and associated ethical guidelines mandate that licensees act with honesty, integrity, and competence, and that they disclose all material facts known or reasonably discoverable about a property. The best approach involves thoroughly investigating the nature of the unreleased mortgage and its potential impact on clear title. This includes obtaining a copy of the original mortgage, verifying its satisfaction or release status with the county recorder's office and the lending institution, and advising the buyer on the implications of proceeding with a clouded title. This proactive and investigative stance aligns with the Indiana Real Estate License Law's requirement to disclose all material facts and to represent clients competently. It ensures the buyer is fully informed about potential risks to their ownership rights before making a decision. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the unreleased mortgage as a minor administrative oversight without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge the potential legal ramifications of an undischarged lien, which could still be enforced by the lender, thereby jeopardizing the buyer's clear ownership. It also violates the duty to disclose material facts, as the existence of an undischarged mortgage is a significant encumbrance. Another incorrect approach would be to advise the buyer to proceed with the purchase and assume the seller will resolve the issue later. This is problematic because it shifts the burden and risk of resolving the title defect onto the buyer without adequate assurance. It also potentially violates the licensee's duty to ensure the transaction is conducted in a manner that protects the client's interests, as the buyer might face unexpected costs or legal complications if the seller fails to follow through. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to simply inform the buyer that the mortgage is unreleased and leave it at that, without offering any guidance or suggesting further investigation. While disclosure is important, a competent licensee should also provide context and advise on the necessary steps to clarify the title status, demonstrating a commitment to protecting the client's property rights. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying potential title defects. They should then gather all relevant documentation, consult with appropriate parties, e.g., title companies, attorneys, and clearly communicate the findings and their implications to the client. The decision-making process should prioritize the client's informed consent and protection of their property rights, adhering strictly to Indiana's real estate regulations and ethical standards. Question 17. Stakeholder feedback indicates that Indiana real estate licensees are sometimes presented with situations where a tenant, who is currently under a one-year lease agreement for a residential property in Indianapolis, expresses a strong desire to terminate their lease early due to unforeseen personal circumstances. The tenant is asking for advice on how to proceed without incurring significant financial penalties. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensee to take in this situation? Option A. Advise the tenant to carefully review their lease agreement for any clauses pertaining to early termination, and if the lease is unclear or silent on the matter, to consult the relevant provisions of the Indiana Residential Landlord and Tenant Act to understand their legal rights and obligations, while also informing the landlord of the tenant's situation. Option B. Recommend that the tenant withhold rent payments as a negotiating tactic to force the landlord to agree to an early lease termination. Option C. Advise the tenant to simply vacate the property and stop paying rent, as their personal circumstances likely provide sufficient grounds to break the lease without penalty. Option D. Inform the tenant that if they are unhappy with the property or their living situation, the lease agreement is automatically voidable and they can leave at any time. Correct answer is A. Advise the tenant to carefully review their lease agreement for any clauses pertaining to early termination, and if the lease is unclear or silent on the matter, to consult the relevant provisions of the Indiana Residential Landlord and Tenant Act to understand their legal rights and obligations, while also informing the landlord of the tenant's situation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate licensees in Indiana, navigating the nuances of lease agreements when a tenant wishes to terminate early. The professional challenge lies in balancing the tenant's desire for flexibility with the landlord's contractual rights and the legal framework governing lease agreements in Indiana. Misinterpreting the lease terms or Indiana law could lead to disputes, financial losses for either party, and potential disciplinary action against the licensee. Careful judgment is required to ensure all parties understand their rights and obligations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the existing lease agreement and a clear understanding of Indiana's landlord-tenant laws concerning early lease termination. This approach prioritizes adherence to the contract and statutory requirements. Specifically, the licensee should identify any clauses within the lease that address early termination, such as penalty provisions, notice requirements, or conditions under which termination is permissible without penalty. If the lease is silent or ambiguous on early termination, the licensee must then consult Indiana code, particularly provisions related to lease agreements and tenant rights, to advise both parties on their legal options and obligations. This ensures that any proposed solution is legally sound and contractually compliant, protecting both the tenant and the landlord. Incorrect approach is analysis. Advising the tenant to simply vacate the property and stop paying rent without a clear understanding of the lease terms or Indiana law is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach ignores the contractual obligations of the lease and could expose the tenant to legal action for breach of contract and unpaid rent. Furthermore, it fails to protect the landlord's interests, suggesting that the tenant can unilaterally break the lease without consequence, based solely on a verbal request, disregards the legally binding nature of written agreements and Indiana statutes. Another unacceptable approach is to advise the tenant to withhold rent as leverage to negotiate an early release. This action is a direct violation of most lease agreements and Indiana law, which typically requires rent payment to remain current even during disputes and can lead to eviction proceedings. Finally, telling the tenant that the lease is automatically void if they are unhappy with the property, without any legal basis or contractual provision supporting this, is a misrepresentation of contract law and Indiana landlord-tenant regulations. Leases are legally binding contracts that cannot be unilaterally voided due to dissatisfaction, unless specific conditions outlined in the lease or by statute are met. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always begin by meticulously examining the written lease agreement. This document is the primary source of rights and obligations. If the lease provides clear guidance on early termination, that guidance should be followed. If the lease is unclear or silent, the next step is to consult the relevant state statutes. In Indiana, this means understanding the Indiana Residential Landlord and Tenant Act and other applicable laws. Professionals must act as intermediaries, providing accurate information about the legal and contractual landscape, not as advisors who dictate outcomes or encourage actions that violate agreements or laws. When in doubt, seeking guidance from legal counsel or a supervising broker is always the most prudent course of action. Question 18. A mortgage loan originator in Indiana is working with a first-time homebuyer who seems overwhelmed by the volume of paperwork. The borrower has initialed each page of the loan estimate but has not asked any clarifying questions. What is the most responsible course of action to ensure the borrower fully understands the mortgage terms before proceeding? Option A. Proceed with the loan application as quickly as possible, emphasizing the benefits of locking in the current interest rate to avoid delays. Option B. Provide the borrower with a generic pamphlet on understanding mortgage loans and assume they will review it at their convenience. Option C. Schedule a dedicated follow-up session to walk the borrower through the loan estimate line by line, explaining key terms and encouraging them to ask questions, and then confirm their understanding. Option D. Rely on the borrower's initial action of initialing each page as sufficient confirmation of their understanding of all loan terms. The correct answer is C. Schedule a dedicated follow-up session to walk the borrower through the loan estimate line by line, explaining key terms and encouraging them to ask questions, and then confirm their understanding. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a borrower misunderstanding the terms of their mortgage, leading to potential default and financial distress. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a mortgage loan originator in Indiana to balance the urgency of closing a loan with their ethical and regulatory obligation to ensure the borrower fully comprehends the commitment they are making. Misrepresenting or glossing over critical loan details, even unintentionally, can have severe consequences for both the borrower and the originator. Careful judgment is required to navigate the complexities of loan disclosures and borrower comprehension. The best approach involves proactively addressing potential comprehension gaps by providing clear, concise explanations of key loan terms and encouraging the borrower to ask questions. This includes walking the borrower through the loan estimate and closing disclosure, highlighting important figures like the interest rate, monthly payment, and total cost of the loan, and confirming their understanding at each step. This aligns with Indiana's regulatory framework, which emphasizes fair lending practices and the importance of providing borrowers with accurate and understandable information to make informed decisions. Ethical considerations also mandate that originators act in the best interest of the borrower, which includes ensuring comprehension of the loan agreement. An approach that involves simply handing over the loan estimate and assuming the borrower will understand its contents without further explanation is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the regulatory expectation of providing clear and understandable information and can lead to a borrower agreeing to terms they do not fully grasp, violating ethical duties of care. Similarly, an approach that focuses solely on the speed of closing, rushing through disclosures, and discouraging questions directly contravenes Indiana's consumer protection laws and ethical standards. This creates an environment where the borrower is pressured into a decision without adequate understanding, increasing the risk of future problems and potential legal repercussions for the originator. Finally, an approach that relies on the borrower's stated understanding without any verification or attempt to clarify complex points is insufficient. While a borrower may verbally agree, their actual comprehension might be lacking, and the originator has a responsibility to ensure genuine understanding, not just passive agreement. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes borrower education and transparency. This involves anticipating potential areas of confusion, utilizing plain language when explaining complex financial terms, and creating a safe space for borrowers to voice concerns and ask questions without feeling rushed or intimidated. Regular check-ins and confirmations of understanding throughout the application and closing process are crucial. Question 19. Process analysis reveals a seller in Indiana has expressed a strong desire for their property to be marketed extensively to achieve the widest possible reach. They have explicitly stated that they are comfortable paying a commission to the listing brokerage, even if they themselves find the buyer during the contract period. Considering these seller objectives, and the standard listing agreement types available in Indiana. Which approach best aligns with both the seller's stated goals and professional best practices for a licensed real estate broker? Option A. Present all three listing agreement types: exclusive right to sell, exclusive agency, and open listing, without offering a specific recommendation, allowing the seller to choose based solely on their own interpretation of the descriptions. Option B. Suggest an open listing agreement, highlighting that it offers the most flexibility for the seller, as multiple brokers can market the property simultaneously. Option C. Propose an exclusive agency listing agreement, emphasizing that the seller can avoid paying a commission if they personally find the buyer, which might appeal to their desire to potentially save money. Option D. Recommend an exclusive right to sell listing agreement, clearly explaining that this guarantees the brokerage a commission if the property sells during the listing term, regardless of who finds the buyer, thereby incentivizing maximum marketing effort. The correct answer is D. Recommend an exclusive right to sell listing agreement, clearly explaining that this guarantees the brokerage a commission if the property sells during the listing term, regardless of who finds the buyer, thereby incentivizing maximum marketing effort. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate licensees in Indiana, balancing a seller's desire for broad market exposure with the need for a clear, legally binding agreement that protects both the seller and the brokerage. The professional challenge lies in accurately advising the seller on the implications of different listing agreement types and ensuring the chosen agreement aligns with Indiana real estate law and ethical practice. Misunderstanding or misrepresenting these agreements can lead to commission disputes, legal liabilities, and damage to the licensee's reputation. The best approach involves clearly explaining the differences between exclusive right to sell, exclusive agency, and open listings, and then recommending the listing agreement that best serves the seller's stated goals while ensuring the brokerage receives compensation for its marketing efforts and expertise. In this case, the seller wants maximum exposure and is willing to pay a commission regardless of who procures the buyer. This aligns perfectly with the characteristics of an exclusive right to sell listing. This agreement provides the most security for the listing broker, as they are guaranteed a commission if the property sells during the listing period, irrespective of whether the broker, the seller, or another party finds the buyer. Indiana law and standard brokerage practices support this as the most common and often most effective listing agreement for sellers seeking comprehensive marketing, and for brokers investing significant resources. An approach that involves recommending an exclusive agency listing would be incorrect because, while it offers some protection to the broker, it allows the seller to procure a buyer themselves without owing a commission. This contradicts the seller's stated desire for a commission to be paid regardless of the procuring party. This could lead to disputes if the seller later claims they found the buyer independently. Recommending an open listing would be professionally unacceptable. This type of listing offers the least protection to the listing broker, as any broker or even the seller can procure a buyer and earn the commission. The listing broker invests time and money in marketing with no guarantee of compensation, which is contrary to sound business practice and potentially unethical if the licensee fails to adequately explain this significant risk to the seller. Finally, presenting all options without a clear recommendation or failing to explain the financial implications of each to the seller would be a failure in professional duty. Licensees have a fiduciary responsibility to advise their clients. Simply listing the types of agreements without guiding the seller toward the most appropriate one based on their stated objectives and the legal framework of Indiana is insufficient. The professional decision-making process should involve 1. Actively listening to and understanding the seller's goals and concerns. 2. Clearly and accurately explaining the features, benefits, and drawbacks of each type of listing agreement recognized under Indiana law. 3. Recommending the listing agreement that best aligns with the seller's stated objectives and provides reasonable protection for the brokerage efforts. 4. Ensuring the seller fully understands and agrees to the terms of the chosen listing agreement before signing. Question 20. During the evaluation of a potential buyer's financial capacity for a home purchase in Indiana, an agent reviews the buyer's stated income and savings. The buyer expresses a desire to purchase a home priced at $350,000. The agent estimates, based on a quick calculation of the buyer's stated income and a rough idea of their savings, that the buyer might be able to afford a mortgage payment that would support a $350,000 purchase price, but this is not a formal loan qualification. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant action for the Indiana real estate agent to take? Option A. Suggest the buyer can stretch their budget to $350,000 if they are willing to significantly reduce their current discretionary spending. Option B. Recommend that the buyer proceed with making an offer on a $350,000 home and then apply for a mortgage, hoping for approval. Option C. Inform the buyer that they can definitely afford a $350,000 home based on the agent's initial assessment of their finances. Option D. Advise the buyer to obtain a mortgage pre-approval from a reputable lender to determine their actual borrowing capacity. The correct answer is D. Advise the buyer to obtain a mortgage pre-approval from a reputable lender to determine their actual borrowing capacity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Indiana real estate agents where a client's financial situation might impact the feasibility of a transaction. The agent must balance their fiduciary duty to the client with the ethical and legal obligations of ensuring a transaction is based on realistic financial capabilities, thereby protecting both the client and the integrity of the real estate market. The challenge lies in providing honest, data-driven advice without overstepping professional boundaries or making guarantees. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the agent acting as a facilitator of information and a guide, rather than a financial advisor. This means advising the client to obtain a pre-approval from a lender, which provides an objective, third-party assessment of their borrowing capacity. This aligns with Indiana's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards, which require agents to be competent and honest, and to avoid misrepresentation. By recommending a pre-approval, the agent is empowering the client with accurate financial data to make informed decisions, fulfilling their duty of care without making unsubstantiated claims about loan amounts. Incorrect approach is analysis. Advising the client that they can definitely afford a $350,000 home based on a quick review of their income and savings is a failure to adhere to professional standards. This constitutes a misrepresentation and potentially unauthorized practice of financial advising. Indiana law requires agents to be truthful and avoid making false promises. Furthermore, it bypasses the crucial step of lender verification, which is the only reliable method for determining loan eligibility. Suggesting the client can stretch their budget to $350,000 if they are willing to cut back on discretionary spending is also problematic. While agents can discuss general affordability concepts, making a definitive statement about the client's ability to afford a specific price point based on lifestyle adjustments is speculative and outside the scope of an agent's expertise. This can lead to financial distress for the client and potential liability for the agent. Recommending that the client wait and see if they get approved for a loan after they find a home is a reactive and potentially damaging approach. This puts the client in a vulnerable position, potentially losing out on a property or facing disappointment and financial strain if they are denied financing. It fails to proactively address the fundamental requirement of financial qualification before engaging in the property search, which is a core aspect of responsible real estate practice in Indiana. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize objective data and expert consultation when dealing with client finances in real estate transactions. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the core issue, client's financial capacity. 2. Recognizing professional limitations, not a lender or financial planner. 3. Seeking the most reliable and objective source of information, lender pre-approval. 4. Communicating this recommendation clearly to the client, explaining its importance for informed decision-making. 5. Documenting all advice given.